Okay, so get this, right? I've got all this stuff in front of me, articles, footage, reactions. It's a lot.
Sounds intriguing. What's caught your attention?
Nazi salutes.
Nazi salutes. Wow.
Yeah, at CPAC.
No, wait, at CPAC.
Yep, at CPAC, the big conservative
The
conference.
Conservative Political Action Conference with like Liz Truss, Nigel Farage, all those folks.
Exactly. I mean, what? It just seems unbelievable, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a story that's raising eyebrows, for
Mm.
sure. CPAC is, usually known for more traditional conservative voices, so this is definitely a head-scratcher.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. What exactly went down there? What happened that's causing this whole uproar?
So the main thing is Steve Bannon's speech.
Bannon, right? Former White House guy, War Room podcast and all that.
That's the one. He was basically pushing for Trump to run for a third term.
A joint term, didn't we, like, settle that whole two-term thing a while back?
Well, yeah, you'd think so, right? But he was suggesting, maybe bending the rules a bit, maybe even breaking some constitutional laws to make it happen.
Hold on, breaking laws at a major political conference?
Yep, that's what he was saying. And he was really working the crowd, getting them all fired up. Fight, fight, fight. He was saying, never surrender.
So the atmosphere was already pretty intense, even before we get to the salute itself.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And then right at the end, as he was finishing up, Bannon, he raises his right arm.
In a salute.
Well, that's the thing, right? Many people are saying it looked a lot like a Nazi salute.
Wow, okay.
And there's more. Some footage has come out apparently showing some people in the audience also making the same gesture. And allegedly, these are well-known American fascists.
Okay, so what does CPAC say about all this? I mean, you've got potentially Nazi salutes at their event. That's got to be a PR nightmare.
Yeah, you'd think so, right? They released a statement condemning anti-Semitism, of course, saying they're against all forms of hate and all that.
Sure, sure.
But then they go on to accuse Democrats of supporting Hamas terrorists attacking Jewish populations in Israel.
Oh, so instead of addressing the Nazi salute thing head on, they're, what, deflecting, pointing fingers elsewhere?
Seems like it, right? Makes you wonder how serious they really are about confronting this whole extremism issue within their own ranks.
Yeah, it's like, are they truly committed to rooting out this stuff, or are they more worried about protecting their image?
It's a good question. I mean, this whole deflection tactic, it kind of speaks volumes, doesn't it?
So what about Bannon? What's he saying about all this?
He denies it, of course, claims he was just waving to the crowd.
Just waving, huh?
That's his story. But needless to say, this whole thing has sparked a ton of reactions, both here in the U.S. and, internationally, too.
Okay, yeah, and speaking of international reactions, Liz Truss was actually at CPAC when this all went down, right?
She was. And, let's just say her presence there has definitely raised some eyebrows. Dan Hodges, he's a British commentator, summed it up pretty well. He said, a former British PM attending a conference where people are literally doing Nazi salutes. Again, when are we going to draw a line on this stuff?
Wow, he doesn't mince words, does he? I mean, seriously, what does it say about her judgment going to this event with everything that happened?
It's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, you could argue that just being there doesn't necessarily mean she endorses everything that goes on, right?
I guess so.
But on the other hand, it definitely makes you think about, what kind of conservatism she's aligning herself with, the kind that seems increasingly comfortable with this kind of, extreme rhetoric and symbolism.
Okay, so what about her speech? Did she address the Bannon thing at all?
No, she didn't mention it directly. She focused mainly on criticizing the UK, saying things like the British state is failing and that they need a MAGA-style movement to, save it.
So very much playing to the CPAC crowd then.
Sounds like it, right? She also spent a good chunk of time blaming the establishment and the deep state for her downfall as prime minister.
Oh, right, that's a familiar tune. Okay, so what about Nigel Farage? He was there too, wasn't he? What was his take on all this?
Oh, Farage was all about praising Trump, calling him the bravest man he knows, and emphasizing how strong he is politically right now.
So no mention of the Bannon incident from him either.
Nope, not a word.
Okay, so we've got these two big UK figures attending this conference where, a potential Nazi salute happens, and neither one of them even acknowledges it.
It's definitely something to think about.
It is. But before we get too deep into the political fallout and all that, I want to step back for a second and look at the gesture itself.
Salute, you mean?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand, the historical context, why this specific gesture is causing such a strong reaction.
You're right, that's crucial. So let's delve into that history a bit. What makes the Nazi salute so potent, so loaded with meaning? Well, I mean, think about it, right? The Nazi salute, that outstretched arm, flat hand, it's inseparable from the horrors of Nazi Germany.
Yeah, it's a chilling thought how a simple gesture can become so heavy with such dark meaning.
Right. It became like a symbol, of obedience, of fanaticism, and ultimately of everything that regime stood for. racial hatred, violence, the whole awful package.
And because of that, because of its history, it's widely recognized as a hate symbol, right? Banned in lots of countries even.
Exactly. So you could imagine when someone, especially a public figure like Bannon, does something that even remotely looks like it, people are going to freak out.
Yeah, I get it. But it also raises this tricky question, doesn't it? What exactly constitutes a Nazi salute?
Ah, yeah, that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? Is it just the physical gesture, or does intent matter? Where do we draw the line?
It's a tough one. I mean, if it's all about intent, then couldn't anyone just use these hateful symbols and then be like, oh, no, I didn't mean it like that?
Exactly. It gets really slippery really fast, and that's exactly why this whole Bannon thing is causing such a stir. Even if we give him the benefit of the doubt, it still forces us to face this uncomfortable reality that some symbols are just so loaded, so toxic, that even a hint of them can be deeply offensive, deeply upsetting.
Yeah, it's like we're tiptoeing through this minefield of symbols and the stakes are just incredibly high.
That's a great way to put it, a minefield of symbols. And speaking of navigating that minefield, there's another reaction to this whole CPAC thing that I think is really interesting.
Oh yeah, what's that?
Nick Fuentes.
Wait, Nick Fuentes, the far right guy. I'm surprised you'd have anything negative to say about what went down at CPAC.
Right. You'd think he'd be all for it, but he actually said he was uncomfortable with Bannon's gesture.
No way, really.
Yeah. On his podcast, he even compared it to, remember that time Elon Musk seemingly did a Roman salute?
Oh, yeah, right. He said something like even he was starting to feel like the guy who wouldn't hail Hitler. So even within the far right, even for someone like Fuentes, there's this recognition that Bannon might have crossed the line, even if he didn't mean to.
It seems like it, yeah. Which I think shows, just how complex this whole thing is. Even within the far right, there are these debates, these disagreements about what's acceptable, what's going too far.
Fascinator. Okay, so we've talked about Fuentes, but what about other reactions to Bannon's salute? Besides the UK folks, I mean.
Well, Lord Danny Finkelstein, he's a conservative peer in the UK, he had a pretty blunt assessment. He just said, it is as bad as you think it is.
Wow. Okay, straight to the point. And coming from someone in the same party as Truss, that makes her decision to attend CPAC even more questionable.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's Lord John Mann, the UK government's independent advisor on anti-Semitism.
Right, right.
He called for, like, zero tolerance, for this kind of stuff. Apologies from anyone who made those salutes. And he really emphasized the danger these gestures pose to the Jewish community.
That's such a crucial point. It's not just about, symbols and intent. These actions can have real-world consequences. They create fear, they intimidate.
Absolutely. And it's not just a UK thing either. Jordan Bardella, a French politician, he actually canceled his speech at CPAC because of this whole incident.
Wow, really?
Yeah, called Bannon's gesture or provocation and all that, clearly referencing Nazi ideology.
So this wasn't just some minor thing then. It's had real international repercussions.
Definitely. I mean, you've got people canceling appearances, international condemnation, the whole 9 yards. And it really speaks to this growing concern about, extremist symbols and rhetoric becoming more normalized on the world stage.
It's a scary thought, and it makes you think about, what kind of image America is projecting to the rest of the world, especially when it comes to extremism and this whole political divide we've got going on.
Absolutely. It feeds into this narrative that's been building for a while now, right? The U.S. is becoming more divided, more susceptible to these extremist ideologies. And when you have people like Bannon with their global influence doing these controversial things, it just reinforces that perception.
Yeah, it's kind of alarming to think that something happening at a U.S. political conference could have such, global repercussions. Makes you wonder about the image America is projecting to the world.
Yeah, it's definitely a valid concern. This whole thing, it kind of plays into this narrative that's been going around, right?
About.
About the U.S. being, increasingly divided, more and more open to extremist ideologies. And when you have figures like Bannon with their, global reach, engaging in this kind of controversial behavior, it just adds fuel to the fire.
And those perceptions, they have real-world consequences, right?
Oh, absolutely. It can damage relationships, diplomatic ties, trade agreements, even national security. It can erode trust, create this anti-American sentiment, make it harder for the U.S. to work with other countries.
It's a lot to think about. We've spent a lot of time talking about Bannon, CPAC, and, all the reactions to this whole salute thing. But what about Elon Musk? You mentioned he's been accused of doing something similar, a Roman salute.
Oh, yeah. Back in January, there was this thing where Musk, he He made a gesture that some people thought looked like a Roman salute.
Right, right. And when people called him out on it, he basically just dismissed them, right?
Pretty much said something like, they need better dirty tricks because the whole everyone is Hitler thing is getting old.
So he's basically saying it was a joke.
That seems to be his stance, which again brings up that question. Does intent even matter when you're using, potentially offensive symbols?
It's tricky. I mean, I get it. We don't want to stifle free speech or, jump to conclusions about people's intentions.
Right.
But at the same time, like we were saying, symbols have power, regardless of, the thought behind them.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be aware of the symbols we're using, the messages they send, whether we mean to or not. We have to understand their historical context, be sensitive to how they might be perceived by others.
Especially when you have a platform as big as Elon Musk's. What he does, what he says, it can influence millions of people.
That's the thing. It all comes back to responsibility, both individual and as a society. We got to be more aware of the potential impact of what we did, the symbols we use, and we need to hold each other accountable for creating a culture that rejects this kind of extremism and hate.
So what can we actually do? How do we stop this creeping normalization of, extremist rhetoric and symbols?
Well, it's a big challenge, right? And it needs a multi-pronged approach. We need to educate, encourage critical thinking, have open and honest discussions about this stuff, and hold our leaders accountable, both in politics and in, the cultural sphere.
It's a lot, but it feels like more urgent now than ever. This whole deep dive has been, well, fascinating and kind of unsettling, to be honest.
I agree.
It's shown us some uncomfortable things about where our political discourse is at and the challenges we face in, dealing with this whole landscape of symbols and ideologies.
Definitely. But it's also shown how important it is to stay informed, to have these difficult conversations and to be actively involved in shaping a future where extremism is rejected, where we uphold democratic values.
And to our listener, we want to leave you with this. Think about how this deep dive into the Bannon salute and everything we've talked about has changed your understanding of the current political climate. What are the potential consequences of letting this extremist rhetoric and these symbols become normal, regardless of intent? And most importantly, what role can you play in pushing back against these dangerous trends and creating a more inclusive, tolerant society? These are big questions. They're worth thinking about, and we encourage you to keep exploring them.